We built this tabernacle several years ago, and we are a very small team, but we have a lot of passion. And God has been very faithful in providing for us to build such a big object as a tabernacle. And the extraordinary thing is that when I tell people we've got a full-size tabernacle, we thought they were going to go, wow, wonderful. And the response we normally get is, what for? So we always say you have to come and see it for yourself, and come on the tour and just let it open up before you. Because we've had so many wonderful testimonies from people that come here who didn't really know what it was all about until they came. And we've seen just about everything in that tabernacle. We've seen lots and lots of people move to tears. We've seen young teenagers take off their shoes because they felt they were in a holy place. And occasionally we've been just so blessed to experience a very tangible presence of God. On one occasion it was so powerful that we literally could not stand in there. The waves of God's Spirit were moving so powerfully. So God blesses this, and I believe that as we go through, I'm believing that God will speak to each one of us in different ways today. And that's my hope and my prayer for us. So let's just commit this morning in prayer to Him. We are much more focused on it being a journey and a revelation of Jesus. And we just see Jesus in every aspect of this tabernacle. And it's not a question of bringing people back to the Mosaic covenant, but it is actually our journey into the presence of God. And that's for us the heart of all of this, what it means to us. And as we go through, I really hope that you catch this, that it is a journey with Him. It's our Christian journey as we go from the cross to the throne room. Right at the very beginning, when God created mankind, they walked in such close relationship together. It was as if the physical world and the spiritual world had no divider between them. So we had a God who is spirit walked in the garden with physical man. They fellowshiped together. They just embraced one another. And of course, when man sinned, that caused a separation to come between man and God, between the physical and the spiritual realm. And because God is a holy God, He could no longer have the same fellowship with unholy Adam. And so God then had to put into operation His plan and purpose to redeem man. And of course He sent man out of the Garden of Eden, and the cherubim closed the way back to that tree of life. Because if man, who had partaken of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, if he went on to partake of the tree of life, he would have lived forever in sin and separation. So actually death became God's redemptive purpose for us, that in dying we could be reborn in Him. So that's what happened then. And basically the Old Testament is a time when God chose to, if you like, open the door that separated physical and spiritual. The Old Testament is when God chose to open that door and reveal Himself to man. For example, with Jacob, when he had the dream and he saw the vision of the angels going up and down the ladder, and he wrestled with God later on, Abraham, when he encountered God, he heard God and he entertained the three visitors. Moses on Mount Sinai, Isaiah in the temple when he had the vision of the Lord high and lifted up and his robe filled the temple. But each of these occasions and many more, it was God, if you like, taking the onus was on him to open the door to reveal himself to his people. Now, of course, when Jesus came to open the door for us so that that division between man and God would no longer be there. And we shall see that when we go in, that the demonstration of the veil being ripped. And we know that John, his beloved disciple, after the resurrection, when he was on the Isle of Patmos in Revelation chapter 4, said, "After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven." And that door is now open because of what Jesus has done for us, so that we can now go back into that relationship with God that he always intended for us. So God had to then put, after man had sinned, his plan into operation, and he did that by choosing a man called Abram. And Abram lived in the Ur of the Chaldeans, right in the midst of worship of all kinds of gods. And God broke through that and spoke to this man, Abram, and called this man to himself and said, "I want you to go to a land I'm going to give you and your descendants forever. And I'm going to bless you, and you will be a blessing. And all nations in the world will be blessed because of you." And Abraham was married to Sarai at the time, and they did not have any children. And yet God promised them many, many descendants, as many as the sand on the seashore and the stars in the sky. And God took this man out of absolute comfort. They've done excavations in the Ur of the Chaldeans, and there was running water, there was central heating. It was a very, very sophisticated city. And Abram, who became Abraham, left all of that to follow God. He heard the voice of the one and only true God. And Abraham came into the land, and I'm going to pick the story up in Genesis 15, where this is where God actually made covenant with Abraham. We've got a covenant-making God, and when God makes covenant, it's forever, and he never breaks it. We can, but he doesn't. And he asked Abraham to get the different animals to cut in half, because covenant was always to do with blood. It was always sealed in blood. So the animals were cut in half. Abraham went into a deep sleep, and it says the Lord himself passed through the carcasses of these animals. And then God spoke to Abraham, saying to him, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions." And that is exactly what happened. Abraham went on to have Isaac, who went on to have Jacob, and Jacob went on to have the 12 sons, and the nation of Israel was born. And of course, one of the sons, Joseph, was a favourite of Jacob. And I'm sure you know the story. When his brothers were jealous of him, they threw him down a pit, and Joseph got taken off to Egypt, where he was at first put in prison when he was wrongly accused, and then later he was restored, and because of the wisdom that God put on him, he was raised up to be second only unto Pharaoh. And during that time there was a drought and a famine in Israel, and the Hebrew people came for food to Egypt, and amongst them, of course, were the brothers. They came to Joseph, and Joseph recognized them, although they didn't recognize him at first. And the result was that lock, stock and barrel, the Hebrew family moved to Egypt. And for the first 30 years, they lived very well because of Joseph having such an important role. But then a new Pharaoh came along, and for 400 years, just as God had spoken to Abraham, they were mistreated as slaves. And after 400 years, they really began to cry out to the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob and ask him for deliverance. And God raised up a man called Moses to be a deliverer. And of course, the story begins with Moses, with the Pharaoh saying that the Hebrews are breeding too quickly. We must kill the baby boys. And Moses was hidden in amongst the bulrushes. And none other than the princess, the Pharaoh's own daughter, pulled Moses out the water and brought him up as her own son. God has everything planned. He has everything ordained, even to get Moses to be brought up in a royal palace so that he had entrance to the Pharaoh. He knew all the protocol that went on in the palace. And of course he would be educated. And God asked Moses to write the first 5 books of the Bible, so it is believed. So he had his education. God prepared everything. And there came a day when Moses saw the Hebrew people being mistreated and beaten. And I'm sure that his mother, when she nursed him as a baby in the palace, began to tell him that he wasn't an Egyptian, that he was a Hebrew. Maybe as a little tot of 2 or 3, she brought that to him and he remembered it. We don't know. But nevertheless, he realized that the Hebrew people were his people, and he killed the Egyptian. And then his cover was blown, if you like, and he had to run. And he ran into the Midian desert, and he met Jethro's daughter there, Zipporah. He got married, had children, and he lived as a shepherd for 40 years. And again, everything is training for reigning. That 40 years in the desert looking after sheep, well, for 40 years he would be in the desert looking after the sheep of Israel, the people of God. So nothing is wasted in God's economy. And one day Moses was walking along and a bush began to speak to him, and he saw it was burning and not being consumed. And God spoke through the bush and gave him the commission, which was the worst thing that Moses could possibly hear. He had to go back to Egypt and confront Pharaoh. And the most important part of all of that, we think of that Moses went back to take the people to the promised land. Yes, he did. But God said to Moses, "Tell Pharaoh to let my people go, that they may worship me." And that was the key moment, was the worship on the mountain. And out of that worship would come the promised land, because we're always told to first worship the Lord our God. So Moses went back, and of course they went through a series of all the plagues. And those plagues that God sent on the Egyptians weren't just random plagues. He didn't suck them out of the air. Those plagues were actually direct attacks at the Egyptian gods. They had a frog god, a cow god, a god of the Nile, and so on. So each plague was showing there is only one true God. And the last plague of all, of course, was the death of the firstborn. And the Israelites had to put the blood of the lamb, the Passover lamb, over their doors, so the angel of death would pass over them and not affect them. But the Egyptians' firstborn died, and then Pharaoh let the people go. And you know the stories, I'm sure. They got down to the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army then began to chase after them again. But God parted the Red Sea, and the Israelites crossed over. And then when the Egyptians tried to follow, the sea came back and drowned them. After several days journeying, they got to Mount Sinai, and it's here I want to pick up the story again. This to me is one of the most significant chapters in our Old Testament. God said to Moses at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19 verse 5, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." And I believe that God wanted all of them to be this kingdom of priests. He wanted the whole of the Hebrew people to be a priesthood and a holy nation for him. And it says in verse 13 that only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they go up the mountain. And to me, as I've read this, I believe there was a window of opportunity for them to go up the mountain and become that kingdom of priests. It says in Deuteronomy 5:5 that when they saw the fire come down on the mountain, they were too afraid to go up. There was just this moment when they were meant to go up, and they didn't. They didn't obey. And God said, if you obey me fully, you will be a kingdom of priests. And the reason they didn't go up was because God descended on the mountain. I really would like us to visualize in our minds what was taking place on Mount Sinai, because we can really read these things very glibly. But it says here in verse 16, "On the morning of the third day there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast." Have you ever thought who was blowing those trumpets? I don't think it was the Israelites. I think it was a heavenly sound, because it goes on to say everybody in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it, looked like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. So you can imagine they're at the foot of this huge mountain range. There's thunder, there's lightning, there's this eerie sound of this trumpet getting louder and louder. There looks like a furnace on this mountain, and then the whole mountain begins to move and tremble. You can understand why they were fearful to go up there. But nevertheless, Moses did go up, and he became the mediator, and he went up and he received from God all sorts of things, instructions of how they were to live, the 10 Commandments, the law, the priesthood, all about the feasts, and of course all about the tabernacle as well. God revealed all these things to him. And while he was up on the mountain, there was that horrible incident with the golden calf, where the people made the golden calf and rebelled against God. And when Moses came down, although he pleaded for the people before God, he was now angry with the people. And he said, who is going to be with God? Who's going to stand with God? And the Levites came and stood with Moses. And they turned from the golden calf and stood with Moses. They were his clan. And perhaps that's why they were chosen to be the ones that were going to be the priests of God. I just leave that with you. So now when they came down at the mountain, when they'd sorted out the rebellion in the camp, then they began to build the tabernacle. And the reason they built this tabernacle was a holy God wanted to be with an unholy people. There was a stage when Moses cried out to God and he said, unless you come with us, we don't want to go. And so often we pray that too. Unless God is with us, unless God is in this, we don't want to be doing it. And this really is what this tabernacle's about. God was putting into process a means of approaching him, a means of coming to him. And the means of coming to a holy God is through a blood sacrifice and an atoning priest. And of course Jesus became that for us. He became the blood sacrifice and the high priest that was our mediator between God and man. And this is what this is all about. So to approach God, you had to come in through sacrifice, and it's a journey into where the very presence of God is. And the presence of God is right at the end in the place called the Holy of Holies. And when God came down on this tabernacle, he would be revealed as a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud by day. The strange thing is, as I drove here this morning, as I came towards Kirby Beedon, I just saw what I looked like a pillar of cloud. Momentarily it went, and I thought, wow. And then I couldn't see it anymore. It was like God giving a little sign I felt this morning. We're going to start our tour over by the gate, so if we could make our way over to the front part here.